Kim, thank you for joining me. Traumatic births is a bit of a taboo subject, isn't it, among women? And of course it shouldn't be. Now, a survey by Mumsnet has shown that 79% of people surveyed said they'd experienced a traumatic birth. Does that number surprise you?
I think it is a very high number, and I think that might partly be a function of a survey like that, in that you're more likely to answer it if you've had a traumatic birth. So it is very high. I mean, the usual figures we see from research are that about 4 to 5% of women develop post-traumatic stress disorder after birth, and normally about a third say their birth was traumatic, which is actually a very high figure, of course. So I think, I mean, if the figure from the Mumsnet survey is genuinely representative, then that's extremely worrying. I think it's probably in practice a little bit lower than that.
What about the outcome that half of these women who were surveyed, more than half, said that the experience has put them off having another child?
Yes, that's very troubling. That doesn't surprise me at all, because it chimes in both with research that's been carried out into birth trauma and our own experience of what women say to us. So quite a lot of women who come to us who say they've had one traumatic birth and the experience was so awful, so frightening, that they will never have another child. And that's really upsetting. And there are other women who will wait a bit longer than they might otherwise have done. So rather than have a kind of standard sort of 2 or 3 year gap, they'll wait 4 or 5 years before trying again. And very often those women feel very, very fearful going into birth again, and they need a lot of support to be able to get through that. It's just quite often the pregnancy reawakes the trauma, and they start having the flashbacks again and the anxiety that they experienced after the first birth.
Now, probably like many women, that resonates with me. In my experience, I find that I can only talk about this, or I do only talk about this within the circle of the mothers that I met at the NCT group. Do you think there's an issue that we aren't talking about this more?
Yes, I think there is an issue. I mean, I think we talk about it more than we used to, which is good. But I know that a lot of women who had a traumatic birth worry about frightening other women, because the last thing a pregnant woman wants to hear is the story of somebody whose birth was really, really terrible. And so I think a lot of the time we stay silent. Women stay silent about the things that happen to them, and it is difficult, because obviously lots of births aren't traumatic, and you don't want to give the impression that if you go into birth you're automatically going to have a terrible experience. But having said that, it is important, I think, to know that things can go wrong during birth, and it is important to talk about the things that can happen, so that we can be well informed and we can put in place, measures to change some of those things and to make birth a better experience.
Now, you're from the Birth Trauma Association. What message do you have for women who do need support?
Um, I would say definitely go out and seek support, because one of the things we find is that sometimes women come to us 20 or 30 years after they gave birth, and they're still haunted by the experience, and they're still having flashbacks, and it's making their life very difficult. So the good news is there is support out there. We offer peer support ourselves. We have a team of peer supporters who respond to emails and also to phone calls. And we have a very big Facebook group of 16,000 members. So people support each other on that group, which is great. And there's also professional support available. So there are two types of therapy that are really helpful with birth trauma. One is called trauma-focused CBT, and one is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. And you can access those by going to your GP and asking for a referral, or if you're in England, you can self-refer to your local talking therapy service. So there definitely is help, and we know from experience and from what women tell us that you can recover from trauma. You can feel, even when you feel you will never get better, we find that women do, after treatment, get better, and then they can look more confidently to having another baby if that's what they want.
So people have come to you after 3 decades and said, "Do you know what? I am affected by the birth. My child's now 30 years old, but I need support now. So it's never too late."
it's never too late. The oldest person who came to us was over 80 actually, but we often have, we yeah, reasonably often have women whose birth trauma was 20, 30, sometimes even 40 years ago, and they'll say things like, on the anniversary of the birth, my child's birthday, I still get flashbacks. So, you get women who, they're a 40-year-old son, for example, and they still have flashbacks to the birth, which is incredibly sad, because you think these women have carried this burden all these years, and unnecessarily, really, because the help is out there. They just often weren't aware that the help is there.
It's not always just the birth, is it though? I think that sometimes when you have a difficult birth, you start to worry about this precious little person overwhelmingly all the time. For example, my son's just started school, and I think that it was a particularly poignant moment because of the experience that I'd had in the hospital. Do you feel like it does affect a wider part of your life than just that moment in hospital?
Oh, absolutely, because what you said is so right, because women so often then become really, really anxious about their child, and anything new, like going to school, kind of tends to reawaken those feelings. And sometimes women say to us they wouldn't even go out the door, or they wouldn't go shopping, or they wouldn't leave their child with another relative, all those things, because their mind's constantly racing with the things that might go wrong, and that something terrible is going to happen. And I mean, I think part of that is normal anyway. If you're a mum, or indeed if you're a dad, you're kind of very worried about your child. That's inevitable. It's just that sometimes it can reach this kind of level where it becomes completely debilitating, and it ruins your ability to take pleasure in parenthood.
It's always so interesting to speak to you, Kim. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you very much, Rachel. Really appreciate it.